Okay, next up is Cook Medical, which has been a mainstay in the local business community here for some 30 years. Today, they have more than 500 employees in Winston-Salem that are producing pioneering, minimally invasive medical devices for sale around the world. Richard Ducharme is a research and development engineer at Cook, and he's here to show you a little bit about its latest device. Now, just a little word of warning, there are going to be some graphic images that come up here, probably a little bit more graphic than Joel showed earlier. So Richard, come on up and let's hear about your new device.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having us and everyone that's worked so hard to put this together. It's exciting. So I'm Rick Ducharme. I'm a research engineer with Cook Medical, and it's true, I do have some gross things to show today. For those of you that aren't familiar with Cook, we are actually the world's largest privately held medical device company in the world. We have over 10,000 employees across and manufacturing facilities across 3 continents. Here in Winston-Salem, we have over 500 employees, and what we've really done as a company to try to hit all the different clinical needs that have been unmet out there is focus in different areas. So we're doing gene technology, we're doing pharmaceuticals, we also have a ton of medical devices as well. So people are probably very familiar with devices such as the cardiac stents, vascular stents, but we do a lot of other things. The division here, though, we specialize in endoscopy. So for those of you that aren't too familiar with endoscopy, what that generally is different types of treatments where we put a camera on a scope, which is a long flexible tube, and usually it goes down your mouth and down your esophagus into your stomach. And what the physician can then do is not only see what's going on, but we make all the devices that allows them to do therapy within your GI tract. So there's a lot of different things that you can do that are much less invasive than having to cut into your tissue in your body, and that accelerates your healing time considerably. So I need to warn you, the device that we're talking about is a device that stops bleeding. So I'm going to show you the next video here is what a typical GI bleed looks like. And you'll see here on the right, you'll actually see the spurting, and keep in mind that you have a scope that's flexible. It's difficult to see exactly where you are and to move. And the current devices that are out there, there's a lot of different ones, and they're all pretty effective, but they all have the same challenge in that in order for them to work, you need to exactly target the bleeding site. So you can imagine that when you have a large bleed, it's very difficult to actually identify where it's coming from. So with this new device that we have, it actually allows you to target much more easily. It's a hemostatic spray that you can just then spray on the surface of the bleed. The way it works is you have the long tube, it's the catheter, and that goes through your flexible scope. And then this is the handle here, and all the user has to do is simply push the big red button on the back, and it fluidizes the powder, and it shoots it down to the injury site. So this is a material that we've developed here at Cook. It's a proprietary material, and it's inorganic, and what's interesting too is that there's no known allergens to this material. The concept actually comes from what the military uses for major traumatic injuries and bleeds, of using these granular powders where they'll pack it onto the injury site. So that's where the concept came from, and we tried to build on that and improve a little bit. So here's an animation of how this actually works. The physician then views the scope as it's advanced to the bleeding site. You see the catheter advance a little bit, and the powder is then sprayed pretty indiscriminately over the bleeding area. So for large bleeds, it's easy, and for hard-to-reach places, it's quite easy too. Once the particles reach the bleeding site, what they do is they start swelling up. Now, if you can think of it as they swell up, they're pulling the water out of the blood, which leads all the clotting factors in a much higher concentration and more likely to meet. And when that happens, that accelerates your clotting, because that's what you need is the little clotting factors to meet each other. The particles also, when they swell up, they stick to each other, and they stick to the bleeding site, so it acts a little bit like a bandage and protects the bleeding site. So instead of using another device that burns the tissue, what we're doing is we're coating it, we're actively providing a clotting scaffold and promoting the natural clotting process. So I need to warn you, here's another spurter, but this is a bleed that normally cannot be treated endoscopically at all. This is a patient that would go to surgery, and just using this device alone, in an animal model, of course, we're able to stop the bleed in less than a minute. So these type of results are very encouraging, and the physicians are very excited. Keeping in mind that there's over 20 million patients a year that are treated for GI bleeds, of those that were the failed therapy, the risk of mortality or death is about 10% when they go to surgery. So when you come and develop a device like this, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and I'll just show you briefly some of the things we've done. But here what we looked at is the time it takes for the blood to clot. So on the first column of this chart, what you see is the clotting time for normal blood is about 250 seconds. And then what we do is we tested a whole bunch of different materials to try to figure out what would work best. And a gold standard for measuring an activation of the clotting is oddly enough, glass beads. And so that accelerates the clotting time by about 100 seconds. And then here is the hemostatic powder developed at Cook, which shows an even greater reduction in clotting time, much faster than what a great contact activator actually is. So that was some very encouraging evidence up front. Our next step was then to go into some animal testing. And what we did was, with Johns Hopkins University, we created a severe gastric ulcer bleeding model. So what we did is we took the largest artery along the outside of the stomach, we surgically brought that into the stomach and closed the stomach and closed the abdomen, and then went in and created the injury at the bleeding site. So then you have this major bleed in the GI tract, and we treated all the animals with this hemostatic powder. And what we found was that all the animals that we treated survived, which is pretty impressive considering there's nothing else that probably would have stopped any of those bleeds. And then the other animals, nothing was able to stop those bleeds. So these early results have been really encouraging. We've now gone into clinical trials. We finished one clinical trial in Hong Kong, and the results have been outstanding. And now we have approval in both Canada and Europe. We're working on our next large studies, and hopefully we'll get it in the US in the next few years. Thank you.